I will now clean the camera body. It really only contains the raw empty body now. Of course it also has the light flap and the mirror. And I also like to unscrew this and this to get access to this film wheel and take it out and clean everything. This axis and this axis I usually do not remove because there's no necessity for it, and the screws here are tricky to put back. Also they need to be put back at a certain tension, but I believe that's not totally important. So, but as long as it's not necessary, you can simply leave them as they are. Underneath the mirror, between the mirror and the light flap, there's a piece of rubber foam, and I've never seen a Contaflex where this rubber foam was still good. When it gets old, it simply dries out, and what happens then is that a lot of dusty thing comes off it and makes the viewfinder dirty, and also finds its way all around in the camera body. Not so easy to remove in this case. This should be good enough. This is the new piece. This works. Sometimes it happens that I damage the black color. When that happens, I like to correct that afterwards with some blackboard paint. there's an old and dry piece of rubber foam down here that I'm going to replace now. And I have already prepared the new piece. Good. As you can see, I have already removed this piece of rubber foam and the eyepiece because it is completely unnecessary and I think it does more harm than any use. The glue is very hard and sticky, so I did not take this off, but there's no problem with that because nobody is going to see it and it's just going to stay there. The last thing I would like to do with this piece is clean the glass, or it's more something like plastic or acrylic, of the exposure meter indicator. And to do that, you really shouldn't use any solvent because that could attack the acrylic and make it pale. So I rather use either just water or maybe some soap water or window cleaner or something like that. As I already said in the beginning, the exposure meter does move when it gets light, and also the values seem quite reasonably, although I believe they are not quite exact. But on this very certain type of exposure meter, this is a double range exposure meter, it is very difficult to do any adjustment. On some of these models they have a resistor down here that you can change to do a little bit of adjustment, and also some do have certain types of darkening discs in front of the selenium cell to adjust how much light it gets. But on this type there's neither, so I don't see an adjustment. I think it's best to leave it to the user to make a judgment about the exactness, and he could then adjust by using a different film speed. I believe it is now time to screw the shutter plate back to the body. Next I will try to put back the top plate to the camera body. And as a preparation I first need to insert this little shaft here. And it comes in from this side. First I need to loosen this screw a little bit. And I put it in this state and then make it tight with the screw again, just that it doesn't fall out that easily. Later, when I put it back onto the camera body, I will push the shaft into this gear. So now one thing that I make sure is that the shutter has run down completely and this gear cannot move any further. Also, this gearbox has run down completely. Then I want those two arms to be not falling down but as high as possible, such that when I put it on, they both will slide into those two wheels. So I think that's all I need to keep an eye on for now. So I will just try. It makes a good impression. Then I use those 3 screws to fix it to the body again. But of course I do not make them tight yet, because it's not lined up correctly yet. So on this side, make sure that the gears for the rewinding engage. So if you turn this, also this should turn. So they are correct. And the same also counts to this side, of course, just that, yeah, I don't want to wind it completely because I don't want so much tension on the shutter now. So I think I can tighten the screws now. I also like to make sure that there's no gap between the camera body and the top plate here. If there's a gap, there's probably something not aligned correctly. Okay, now I will try to push the shaft inside, but to do that I first need to wind the shutter, because otherwise the two arms are in the way. Also, it's a good opportunity to check that the two arms are laying on those two wheels. If they don't, that's not correct. So now goes the light flap down, now also the mirror. And yeah, that looks good. So to push the shaft inside, I again loosen this small screw here. And then use another screwdriver. I think that's already it. Okay, so now what I need to check, but let me first insert the camera back to the body because it has a better stand then. So what I believe now is that the gearbox has wound completely, but the shutter is not wound completely. I can see that because the shutter leaves are not completely open. So I can probably release the shutter, but it is not going to execute. And to solve that problem, I need to realign this wheel to this wheel, and I can do that by removing this screw and then lifting this gear and putting those two in a different state. That's what I'm going to do now. So when winding, this gear is turned clockwise, and as I want it to wind further, I will make something like a pre-tension clockwise in the released state of the gearbox. So let me first try just one tooth, like so. That sounded much better. To check that it really works, I like to use a slow speed. This should be 1 second. And that's good. So the most important setting to test now is the B setting. And I believe it does not work yet, because it was in the B setting. Oh, it does work. Very nice. The reason the B setting is so important to check is because it is held open just by the state of the gearbox running down. So pushing it down does not let it run down completely. Finally, when lifting the finger, it runs down just to the end. And that difference is required by the shutter to differ the state of open and close. Also, when it's completely wound, the aperture as well as the shutter loops, of course, should be completely free. You can still see them, but they are definitely out of the optical path right now. So the next thing to check is the movement of the light flap as well as the mirror. So it is important that the light flap that covers the film from getting any light will move down and close before the shutter loop leaves open. Now you see the light flap. The shutter leaves have not opened yet. Now they start and the light flap has closed. That's good. Also, the mirror should move down until it reaches this little pinion here that can be adjusted by a screw that is covered by this screw. As long as the focus of the film plane and the view is aligned, you should really not do anything on that screw, because it would mess around with the focus point of the camera. So to check that the mirror leans against the pin, I watch it closely and it should somewhere there stop moving down. The next check I'm doing is to test that the aperture is closing fast enough. And to do that, I set it to f22, set the speed to 1/500. That's when it is moved clockwise until the end. And then I look through the film plane, and I want to see a very small and short spot of light. And there it was. And it's just as it should be. And if it's bigger than that, then the aperture is not closing fast enough. And if you don't see anything, then something else must be wrong. I have now adjusted the times of the retard mechanism. I didn't take this on video, but you can look this up on the Synchro Compo Repair manual, and they exactly show you how to adjust the 1 second, the 1/15th of a second, and the fastest speed. The speeds are, as always, not perfectly matching, but I think I found a good compromise, and I will measure the final speeds when I finished assembling everything back together and compare them. So now let's close the shutter unit. First the shutter speed setting ring and the cover plate. And then this fixing ring here, it screws on. And I like to make it just tight enough, but not too tight. So the speed it is easy to set the speeds, but still everything is hold in position and nothing is loose. I think this is good. Check that the shutter still executes. So this should be 1/8 of a second. Yeah. Also check B. Yeah. Check a different aperture. Very good. I now screw back the centered lens element. Also already cleaned it from underneath, so once I screw it back, no dirt can reach the lower surface anymore.